Twin sisters Zara and Imani Washington, 17, jolt awake on Flight 2507 when the captain's panicked voice echoes through the cabin, any fighter pilot on board. Their father, former Air Force Major Darius Washington, rises. White flight attendant blocks him, real military personnel only, sir. Before we dive into this incredible story of courage in the face of discrimination, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed prejudice in a place where skills should matter more than skin color. Now, let's find out what happened next on that fateful flight. The morning had started like any other important day for the Washington family. In their modest but immaculate home in Atlanta, Georgia, Darius and Keisha Washington helped their twin daughters, Zara and Imani, prepare for what could be the most significant opportunity of their young lives. The prestigious Westfield Aviation Academy was holding interviews, and the twins had both been shortlisted, a rare honor and their chance to follow their dreams of becoming pilots. "Did you pack your recommendation letters?" Keisha asked, checking items off her meticulous list. A respected psychologist, she approached everything with the same clinical precision. "Yes, Mom, and our certificates from the junior flight program," Zara replied, the more outspoken of the twins. She carefully placed her portfolio in her carry-on bag. Imani, quieter but equally determined, was reviewing flight mechanics on her tablet. "Dad, do you really think we have a chance? Two black girls from the same family." Darius Washington paused from folding his dress uniform. A decorated major with 15 years of Air Force service, including 3 combat tours flying F-16s, he'd faced this question in various forms throughout his career. "The aviation world hasn't always welcomed people who look like us," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "When I first enlisted, some instructors barely spoke to me. My squadron leader accidentally lost my paperwork 3 times." He placed his hands on his daughter's shoulders. "But times are changing. Slowly, yes, too slowly, but changing. And you two are twice as good as I was at your age. And still have to be twice as good as the white applicants," Keisha added, not unkindly, but truthfully. Zara closed her suitcase with a determined snap. "Then we'll be 4 times as good." At the airport, the family's optimism dimmed as they approached security. White passengers flowed through the checkpoint with minimal interaction, but when the Washingtons reached the front, the atmosphere shifted. ID and boarding passes, the TSA agent demanded without the smile he'd offered the previous travelers. He scrutinized their documents longer than necessary. "Purpose of your trip?" "Academy interviews," Darius replied evenly, having experienced this countless times. "Step aside for additional screening," another agent suddenly appeared, gesturing to Darius. "Random check." Keisha checked her watch anxiously. "Our flight boards in 20 minutes. Should have arrived earlier," the agent replied dismissively. Darius maintained his composure as they patted him down and opened his meticulously packed bag, disrupting the careful organization. His military ID and medals received only cursory glances. 15 minutes later, the family rushed to their gate, arriving just as final boarding was called. "Cutting it close," the gate agent remarked, scarcely looking up. "Almost gave your seats away." As they hurried down the jetway, Imani whispered, "You'd think Dad's uniform would count for something." Darius squeezed her shoulder. "It's just another hurdle, baby girl. We've cleared higher ones." The Washingtons were greeted at the aircraft door by Beverly Miller, the lead flight attendant, a slim blonde woman whose professional smile faltered momentarily as she checked their boarding passes. "First class?" she asked, a note of surprise in her voice as she examined their tickets a second time. "Those are seats 3A through 3D. Her tone suggested an anomaly rather than a simple direction. As they made their way to their seats, Darius leading with military precision, Beverly followed closely behind. "There seems to be some confusion," she said when they reached the row. "These are premium seats." "Yes," Keisha replied calmly. "Which we purchased. Perhaps you were upgraded unexpectedly." Beverly persisted. Economy might be more typical. We're exactly where we're supposed to be, Darius stated firmly but politely. He'd splurged on first class to ensure the twins arrived rested for their interviews. A middle-aged white man in an expensive suit, later identifying himself as Parker Thompson, CEO of a software company, looked up from his phone with irritation. "Is there a problem with these people?" he asked Beverly, as if the Washingtons weren't standing right there. "No problem," Darius replied before Beverly could answer. He helped his family settle in, maintaining his dignity despite the stares from several passengers. The captain's voice soon came over the intercom, introducing himself as Captain Gerald Hammond. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're looking at clear skies and a smooth ride to Denver today." As he continued with flight details, Darius noticed something odd. When Captain Hammond had walked through first class earlier, he'd greeted several passengers warmly, shaking hands with Thompson and chatting briefly with an elderly white couple. He'd walked past the Washingtons without acknowledgement. More telling to Darius's experienced eye were the subtle technical concerns, the slight delay in the auxiliary power unit response during pre-flight checks, and a hydraulic pressure gauge that the co-pilot had checked twice during his walkthrough. Nothing necessarily alarming, but worth noting. Zara, aviation enthusiast to her core, attempted to engage Beverly about the aircraft when she came by with pre-departure beverages. "Is this the Airbus A320 with the updated hydraulic system?" she asked eagerly. "I'm not a mechanic, sweetie," Beverly replied dismissively. "Orange juice or water?" 10 minutes later, a white teenage boy across the aisle asked Beverly about the flight time. She not only answered his question but engaged him enthusiastically when he mentioned his interest in planes, even offering to ask if he could visit the cockpit after landing. Keisha and Darius exchanged knowing looks but said nothing. They'd taught their daughters that this was the reality they would face: different standards, different treatment, and the constant need to prove themselves worthy of basic respect. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the twins eventually drifted to sleep, the emotional toll of the morning's encounters catching up with them. Darius remained alert, his military training making him sensitive to the subtle vibrations and sounds of aircraft operation. Something wasn't quite right, though he couldn't immediately identify the cause for concern. 2 hours into the flight, Darius noticed the first indications of trouble. The aircraft made a subtle but unusual adjustment, a compensation that passengers wouldn't detect but that his thousands of flight hours recognized as non-standard. He observed a flight attendant emerging from the cockpit with a tightness around her eyes that contradicted her practiced smile. "Everything all right up front?" he asked casually as she passed. "Just routine," she responded, too quickly. "Nothing to worry about." 15 minutes later, Captain Hammond's voice came over the intercom, its forced casualness apparent to Darius. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor technical considerations. Nothing to be concerned about, but we may need to adjust our route slightly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Darius noticed Beverly and another flight attendant speaking in hushed tones, occasionally glancing toward the cockpit. Their movements had taken on a hurried precision that passengers might miss but that military personnel would recognize, preparation disguised as routine service. Zara stirred, her subconscious perhaps registering the changed atmosphere. "Dad? Are we there?" "Not yet, sweetheart. Go back to sleep," Keisha soothed, but her eyes questioned Darius. "Just some turbulence coming up," he reassured her, though he'd felt no atmospheric indicators of rough air. The twins drifted back to sleep, but Darius remained vigilant. 20 minutes passed with growing tension among the crew. The plane made another adjustment, this one more pronounced, a slight yaw that shouldn't occur in normal operations. Darius unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, intending to speak directly with Beverly, who was now checking overhead compartments with methodical urgency. "Sir, you need to remain seated," she said firmly when she saw him. "I'm aware of the hydraulic issue," Darius replied quietly. "I've handled similar situations in F-16s and commercial aircraft. I can help." Beverly's expression shifted from professional authority to skepticism. "Sir, Please don't add to our concerns with assumptions. The flight crew is fully capable. She was interrupted by a noticeable shudder running through the aircraft. Several passengers looked up in alarm. That's a secondary hydraulic system problem, Darius stated confidently. Your primary is already compromised, isn't it? Beverly's eyes widened slightly, but her response was cut off by Captain Hammond's voice, now stripped of its reassuring tone. Cabin crew, secure for immediate descent. The professional facade among the flight attendants dropped as they moved with renewed urgency. The plane banked sharply, causing several passengers to gasp. The twins awakened fully, their trained eyes immediately assessing the situation. Dad? Imani questioned, her voice calm but concerned. Hydraulic failure, he confirmed quietly. Possibly multiple systems. As the gravity of the situation became clear to the passengers, anxiety spread through the cabin. Parker Thompson repeatedly pressed his call button, demanding answers. The elderly couple clutched each other's hands. A mother with an infant began to cry softly. Captain Hammond's voice returned, now with unmistakable tension. Ladies and gentlemen, we are initiating emergency protocols and diverting to the nearest suitable airfield. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions. The plane descended rapidly, causing ears to pop and stomachs to lurch. Then, most alarmingly, it began a series of subtle oscillations, the control surfaces fighting to maintain stability with compromised hydraulics. That's not good, Zara whispered, her training allowing her to recognize what most passengers couldn't. Through the window, instead of the expected cityscape of an emergency landing at a major airport, they saw only mountains and forests. Whatever airfield they were attempting to reach was remote, likely military or rural. The oscillations worsened. In the cockpit, alarms would be sounding as the backup system struggled to compensate. Darius knew from experience that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Then came the announcement that confirmed his worst fears. Captain Hammond's voice, tight with controlled panic, if there is any military or commercial pilot on board with emergency procedure experience, please identify yourself to the cabin crew immediately. Any fighter pilot on board? The captain's desperate voice echoed through the cabin as the plane shuddered violently. The twins jolted fully awake, their trained eyes immediately registering the emergency. Major Darius Washington unbuckled his seatbelt and stood with practiced military precision. Former Air Force Major Darius Washington, he announced clearly. F-16 combat pilot, 15 years of service, experienced with hydraulic failures. Beverly rushed forward, positioning herself between Darius and the path to the cockpit. Her face flushed with apparent skepticism. Sir, please return to your seat. We need actual military personnel. I am actual military personnel, Darius stated firmly, reaching for his wallet to produce his ID. Dad flew 3 combat tours, Zara interjected, her voice steady despite the chaos. Beverly's expression hardened. We don't have time for people playing hero. Please sit down before you injure yourself. The plane lurched again, more violently. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments. Screams erupted from the back of the aircraft. Keisha stood, retrieving something from their carry-on. My husband is Major Darius Washington, decorated pilot with the Distinguished Flying Cross. She thrust forward a leather case containing Darius's military ID and medals. He's exactly who the captain is asking for. Beverly barely glanced at the credentials. Anyone could carry military memorabilia. From across the aisle, Parker Thompson's voice cut through the tension. Do we really expect this man to know what he's doing? How do we know he's not making this worse? The twins exchanged glances of disbelief as the plane continued its unstable descent. Passengers around them were divided, some nodding in agreement with Thompson, others expressing outrage at the delay in accepting help. Let him through, shouted the elderly woman several rows ahead. My grandson is Air Force, and I know discrimination when I see it. The standoff might have continued if not for the cockpit doors suddenly opening. Captain Gerald Hammond emerged, his face pale with stress, his uniform drenched in sweat. His eyes scanned the cabin and locked on Darius. For a moment, there was silence broken only by the alarms and the sound of the struggling engines. Would you have stood up to help in this terrifying situation? Comment, courage, if you believe in speaking up when lives are at stake, even when facing discrimination. Hit that like button if you're appalled by how Beverly treated a decorated veteran. And subscribe if you want to see what happens next in this incredible story of prejudice and heroism at 30,000 feet. Do you think Beverly was right to be cautious during an emergency, or was her behavior clearly driven by bias? How would you have reacted if you were Captain Hammond in this situation? Let's continue this intense journey and find out what happened next. Captain Hammond's weathered face registered shock, then recognition, and finally, astonishingly, he snapped to attention and saluted. "Major Washington," he said, his voice carrying through the now silent cabin. "I hardly recognized you, sir." The passengers watched in confusion as Beverly's mouth fell open. Darius returned the salute crisply. "You two know each other?" Beverly stammered. 336th Fighter Squadron, 2010 to 2013, Hammond confirmed. "And Major Washington wasn't just a pilot, he was my commanding officer. Saved our entire unit during the sandstorm incident in Kandahar." He turned to Darius, professionalism temporarily overriding the emergency. "Never thought I'd see you again, sir, especially not like this." Parker Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly finding his phone intensely interesting. "Status report," Darius requested, immediately shifting to operational mode. "Catastrophic hydraulic failure in primary and secondary systems. Manual control severely compromised. Co-pilot Williams is incapacitated, possible heart attack. I've been solo for 15 minutes." The gravity of the situation hit the cabin like a physical force. No wonder Hammond had sounded desperate, he was flying a crippled aircraft single-handedly while his co-pilot lay unconscious. "I need you in the cockpit, now," Hammond said, all pretense of normal operations abandoned. As Darius moved to follow, Beverly stepped aside, her face flushed with shame. But there was no time for apologies. "Keisha, girls," Darius turned to his family. "I need you to help the crew manage the passengers. This is going to get rough." Without waiting for a response, Darius followed Hammond into the cockpit, the door closing behind them. In the cabin, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Beverly stood frozen until Keisha gently touched her arm. "We need to secure the cabin for emergency landing," Keisha said firmly. "My daughters know aircraft emergency protocols." Beverly nodded numbly, professionalism reasserting itself. Yes, of course." Meanwhile, the twins had already begun moving through the cabin, checking seatbelts and explaining proper brace positions to frightened passengers. "The A320 has tertiary hydraulic backups," Zara was explaining to a group of businessmen. "We'll have limited control but enough for a controlled descent if we maintain optimal speed." "How do you know all this?" one woman asked, clinging to her words like a lifeline. "Our grandfather was one of the Tuskegee Airmen," Imani explained, helping an elderly man tighten his seatbelt. "Our father continued that legacy. Aviation is in our blood, even though people don't expect black women to be pilots." Parker Thompson, overhearing this, looked up from his phone. "Your family has 3 generations of pilots." 3 generations of pilots who've had to prove themselves over and over, Keisha confirmed, passing out pillows for passengers to place against their chests. "My father-in-law had to fight just to fly for his country. My husband was repeatedly passed over for promotion despite exemplary service. Now my daughters face the same barriers." The intercom crackled to life with Darius's voice, steady and authoritative. "This is Major Washington speaking. Captain Hammond and I are implementing emergency procedures for a controlled landing. We've been cleared for an emergency approach to Rockwood Military Airfield in approximately 12 minutes. This will be challenging due to the remote location and compromised controls, but both Captain Hammond and I have trained for these scenarios. The professionalism in his voice calmed the cabin momentarily, but his next words erased any false sense of security. Our situation is critical. The hydraulic failures are more extensive than initially assessed. We have minimal control surface function. Flight attendants will now demonstrate emergency landing positions. It is imperative that you follow their instructions precisely. As Beverly began the emergency briefing, her voice trembled slightly. The twins continued moving through the cabin, their calm competence a stark contrast to their earlier treatment. In the cockpit, visible through the partially open door, Darius and Hammond were fighting the controls, their faces intense with concentration. Technical terms flew between them as they assessed damage and calculated approaches. "We're coming in too steep," passengers heard Hammond say. "Compensating with thrust differential," Darius responded. "We need more right aileron." "Systems not responding." "Manual override failing." The oxygen masks deployed fully as the cabin pressure fluctuated. The plane banked sharply to the right, then leveled with obvious effort. Keisha made her way to the cockpit doorway. "How bad?" she asked quietly. Darius didn't sugarcoat it. "We're going to attempt an emergency landing in mountainous terrain with minimal control authority. The runway is short, military grade. It's designed for fighter jets, not commercial aircraft. Will we make it?" The look they exchanged contained 17 years of marriage, unspoken fears, and absolute trust. "Get the girls ready," was all he said before turning back to the controls. As Keisha returned to the cabin, she found the twins already organizing passengers into groups, ensuring those with medical training were distributed throughout the aircraft and that children were properly secured with makeshift harnesses created from blankets and seatbelt extensions. "The Washington women," Beverly said, a new respect in her voice as she worked alongside them. "You're all extraordinary." "We've had to be," Keisha replied simply. The plane began its final approach, the mountains looming dangerously close outside the windows. Rockwood Airfield, barely visible in the distance, looked impossibly small for their aircraft. "Brace positions," Beverly called out. "Heads down, arms crossed." The twins exchanged one last look before following the protocol they'd known since childhood. "See you on the ground," Zara whispered. In one piece, Imani completed their longtime mantra. As the ground rushed up to meet them, the intercom crackled once more with Darius's voice, "Brace for impact. Brace. Brace." Inside the cockpit, Darius and Captain Hammond worked with the practiced precision of seasoned military pilots. The instrument panel flashed with warnings as they fought to maintain control of the crippled aircraft. "We've lost hydraulic pressure to the elevators," Hammond reported, his knuckles white on the controls. "Rudder response is minimal." Darius surveyed the situation with the calm assessment that had earned him command status. "We need to come in at a higher speed than normal to maintain control authority, then perform a controlled descent at the last possible moment." "The Rockwood runway is only 6,000 feet, Hammond countered. "It wasn't designed for commercial aircraft." "We don't have options, Jerry. Denver's too far with our current control issues, and the regional airports don't have the emergency response teams we'll need." Darius studied the approach charts. "We'll need to configure for a no-flap landing. It's our only shot." Hammond nodded grimly. "We need passenger cooperation to maximize survival chances. Weight distribution will be critical during our approach." Darius pressed the intercom. "This is Major Washington. We're implementing an emergency landing plan. Our success depends on precise passenger placement. The cabin crew will provide instructions. Your complete cooperation is essential." In the main cabin, Beverly gathered the flight attendants for a rapid briefing. Despite her earlier behavior, her professionalism was reasserting itself, though she still avoided looking directly at Keisha or the twins. "We need to redistribute passengers based on weight," she explained. "And prepare for a possible ground evacuation under difficult conditions." Zara stepped forward. The A320 center of gravity is critical during compromised landings. We should move heavier passengers forward of the wing for the approach, then redistribute aft during final descent to prevent tail strike. Beverly stared at her, momentarily speechless at the technical knowledge. Imani added, we should also prioritize exit row seating for able-bodied adults who can assist with rapid evacuation. That's exactly right, Beverly acknowledged. How do you know all this? We've been studying aviation emergency procedures since we were 12, Zara explained without pride or accusation. It's part of our preparation for the academy. Something shifted in Beverly's expression, a reluctant acknowledgement that she had fundamentally misjudged these young women based solely on their appearance. I'll coordinate passenger relocation, she said finally. You two help with emergency briefing. As they dispersed to their tasks, Parker Thompson's voice rose above the controlled chaos. This is outrageous. I'm not moving from my seat because some maintenance issue wasn't properly checked. His face was flushed with a combination of fear and indignation. Keisha approached him calmly. Mr. Thompson, I understand your frustration. As a psychologist, I can tell you that what you're experiencing is a fear response manifesting as anger. Don't psychoanalyze me, he snapped. I paid for this seat, and I'm staying in it. That's your right, she acknowledged. But the physics of aircraft control don't care about seat assignments or ticket prices. This is about survival, yours included. Something in her steady gaze made him falter. Around them, other passengers had already begun complying with the relocation instructions, moving quietly with the solemn understanding of their situation. Fine, Thompson conceded reluctantly. But I want it noted that I'm doing this under protest. As passengers were reorganized, the twins moved through the cabin with remarkable poise. They helped elderly passengers secure their positions, demonstrated proper brace techniques to those who weren't paying attention, and managed to calm several frightened children by explaining the sounds and sensations they might experience during landing in simple, non-frightening terms. You're like angels, an older woman commented as Imani helped adjust her oxygen mask. Just well prepared, Imani replied with a small smile. Outside the windows, the weather was deteriorating rapidly. The previously clear skies had given way to dark clouds and turbulence as they approached the mountainous region surrounding Rockwood Airfield. The military facility, primarily used for training exercises, was visible in the distance, a small clearing in the otherwise densely forested landscape. We've got another problem, Hammond's voice came over the intercom for Darius only. Rockwood Tower is reporting wind shear conditions at the approach end of the runway. Crosswinds at 25 knots gusting to 40. Darius processed this new complication. Crosswinds of that magnitude would make their already challenging landing nearly impossible with compromised hydraulics. We'll need to approach from the southwest, he decided. Use the mountain ridge as a windbreak. That's a steeper descent path. With our limited elevator control. It's our best option, Darius interrupted. I've done similar approaches in worse conditions in Afghanistan. Hammond nodded, trusting his former commander's judgment. Emergency services are on standby, but they're limited. Rockwood isn't equipped for commercial incidents. We've got 12 minutes to landing, Darius announced to the cabin. Final preparation now. Secure all loose items. Assume brace positions when instructed. Beverly approached the cockpit doorway, her earlier arrogance replaced by professional respect. Cabin is secured, Major. Passengers are redistributed as recommended. Thank you, Darius acknowledged without looking away from the controls. Any medical personnel on board? 2 nurses and a paramedic. They're positioned throughout the cabin to assist post-landing. Good. We'll need them. His expression remained focused but grave. This will be rough, Beverly. When we touch down, evacuation must be immediate. There's a risk of fire with the hydraulic fluid leakage. Beverly's face paled, but she nodded resolutely. We're ready. In the main cabin, Keisha gathered the twins close for a moment. Remember everything your father taught you, she said quietly. Impact absorption through proper positioning, Zara recited. Protect head and neck at all costs, Imani continued. Move against the direction of impact, they finished together. It was a litany Darius had drilled into them from the time they were old enough to fly, his fighter pilot's knowledge translated to civilian safety. As they separated to take their assigned positions, Beverly stopped them. I owe you an apology, she said, the words clearly difficult for her. I made assumptions that were. There'll be time for that later, Imani cut her off kindly but firmly. Right now, we all have jobs to do. The plane began its final approach sequence, descending toward the small military airstrip. Through the windows, passengers could see emergency vehicles positioned along the runway, far fewer than would be present at a commercial airport. Brace positions. Beverly called out as the aircraft aligned for its approach. The twins exchanged one last look before tucking their heads down. In that glance was a lifetime of shared dreams, the memory of watching their father fly at air shows, of building model aircraft together, of studying flight manuals late into the night while other teenagers were at parties. In the cockpit, Darius and Hammond worked in perfect synchronization, their military training overcoming the aircraft's mechanical failures through sheer skill and determination. The landing gear deployed with a reassuring thunk. 500 feet, the automated system announced. 400. Right aileron failing, Hammond reported tensely. Compensating with differential thrust, Darius responded, his hands dancing across the throttles. 300 feet. 200. The ground rushed up to meet them with alarming speed. 100. Brace. 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 Darius called through the intercom. The aircraft touched down with bone-jarring force, bounced once, and then slammed back onto the runway. The scream of tortured metal filled the cabin as they hurtled down the short military runway at dangerous speed. Reverse thrust. Hammond shouted. Negative response on 1 and 2. Darius called back. Manual braking only. The end of the runway approached with terrifying speed, the forest beyond promising catastrophe if they couldn't stop in time. Every passenger and crew member held their breath as the aircraft shuddered and fought against its momentum, the future of everyone aboard hanging in the balance. The aircraft screamed down Rockwood's military runway, the wheels smoking against the tarmac as Darius and Hammond fought for control. The end of the pavement approached with terrifying speed, the dense forest beyond promising devastation if they couldn't stop in time. We're running out of runway, Hammond shouted over the shrieking alarms. Full right asymmetric braking, Darius commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. We'll ground loop if necessary. The maneuver, dangerous under normal circumstances, was their only option. The aircraft began a controlled swerve, bleeding off speed through friction and aerodynamic drag. In the cabin, passengers held their brace positions as centrifugal forces slammed them sideways. The twins, despite the terror, recognized their father's technique, a fighter pilot's last resort to stop a damaged aircraft. Just when it seemed certain they would overrun the runway's end, the plane shuddered to a halt, its nose barely 30 feet from the tree line. For a moment, complete silence fell over the aircraft. Then, evacuate. Evacuate. Beverly's voice broke through the shock. Leave everything behind. Move quickly to the nearest exit. The emergency training of the crew took over. Exit doors were thrown open, slides deployed, and passengers began streaming out into the cold mountain air. The twins immediately assisted, guiding disoriented travelers toward the exits, helping the elderly and children. Beverly, working alongside them with newfound respect, caught Zara's arm briefly. I was wrong about you, about your entire family, she admitted, the chaos around them making honesty easier. My prejudice could have killed everyone on board. Help now, talk later, Zara replied without malice, turning to assist a mother with an infant. Outside, emergency vehicles approached as passengers gathered on the grassy field beside the runway. Smoke had begun wisping from the aircraft's landing gear, the superheated brakes threatening to ignite the hydraulic fluid that had leaked during their descent. Inside the cockpit, Darius and Hammond completed the emergency shutdown procedures. Just like Kandahar, Hammond said with grim humor as they worked. Except with civilians instead of munitions. And trees instead of insurgents, Darius added, the gallows humor of military pilots surfacing even now. Let's get out before this bird lights up. They made their way through the empty cabin, checking for remaining passengers, and exited through the forward door just as the first flames appeared beneath the aircraft. On the field, Keisha ran to Darius, embracing him with tears streaming down her face. The twins joined them, the family clinging together as the reality of their survival sank in. I knew you could do it, Dad, Imani whispered. We all did, Zara added. Parker Thompson stood awkwardly nearby, watching the family reunion with conflicted emotions playing across his face. When Darius finally noticed him, Thompson stepped forward hesitantly. Major Washington, he began, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. I owe you an apology. Darius regarded him evenly, neither accepting nor rejecting the overture. When I saw you stand up, Thompson continued, the words clearly difficult for him, my first thought wasn't thank God, someone qualified. It was. He trailed off, unable to finish the admission. It was not him, Darius completed for him. Because of what I look like. Thompson nodded, shame evident in his posture. Yes. And I was wrong. Catastrophically wrong. You saved all our lives. It wasn't just me, Darius corrected, placing his hands on his daughter's shoulders. My entire family helped save this flight. Remember that the next time you make assumptions about who belongs where. As emergency workers moved among the passengers, checking for injuries and distributing blankets against the mountain chill, Captain Hammond approached with an emergency services official. Major Washington, the captain said formally, I'd like to state for the official record that your actions, and those of your family, were directly responsible for the survival of everyone aboard Flight 2507. The official, a gruff man in a firefighter's uniform, nodded. We've got 12 minor injuries, 2 moderate, but no fatalities. It's damn near miraculous given the condition of that aircraft. He glanced back at the plane, where firefighters were now dousing the small fires that had erupted. I've seen military training crashes with better odds than what you faced. Beverly joined them, having completed her passenger accounting. Everyone's accounted for, she reported. Then, with visible effort, she turned to the Washington family. I need to apologize formally. My behavior was inexcusable. It was prejudiced, Keisha corrected firmly. Let's call it what it was. Beverly flinched but nodded. Yes. I made assumptions based on race that could have had fatal consequences. I'm deeply sorry. Your prejudice nearly cost lives, Darius stated, not unkindly but without sugarcoating the truth. But you executed your evacuation duties professionally. That counts for something. As they spoke, media helicopters appeared overhead, drawn by reports of the emergency landing. In the distance, larger rescue vehicles were making their way up the mountain roads to the remote airfield. They're going to want statements, Hammond noted, watching the helicopters circle. Major, I want you and your family front and center when they start filming. This story needs to be told correctly. Our interviews at the academy, Imani suddenly remembered, the immediate danger having pushed their original purpose from mind. Darius checked his watch. We've missed them. But somehow I think they'll understand. If they don't, Hammond said firmly, they'll be hearing from me. And every pilot who learns what happened here today. As the first reporters reached the scene, cameras trained immediately on the smoking aircraft and the huddle of grateful passengers. The Washington family stood together, dignity and competence evident in their posture despite the ordeal they'd just endured. Major Washington, the first reporter called, rushing forward with a microphone. Can you describe what happened up there? Before Darius could respond, Zara stepped forward. My father and Captain Hammond executed a textbook emergency landing under impossible conditions, she stated with the precision and confidence of someone born to the cockpit. The hydraulic failures they overcame would have defeated most pilots. And who are you? The reporter asked, clearly surprised by the authoritative response from a teenager. Imani joined her sister. We're the Washington twins. Future pilots. Black women in aviation. She met the camera's gaze directly. Remember our names. Dawn broke over Rockwood Airfield, casting long shadows across the damaged aircraft that stood as a monument to both disaster and miracle. Emergency vehicles had continued arriving throughout the night, transforming the remote military facility into an impromptu crisis center. Passengers wrapped in thermal blankets clustered in groups, many still processing their brush with death. The Washington family had spent the night assisting emergency services, the twins' knowledge of aviation and passenger psychology proving invaluable as they helped coordinate care for the more traumatized survivors. Darius had worked alongside the NTSB investigators who'd been helicoptered in, his expertise helping piece together the sequence of mechanical failures that had nearly doomed Flight 2507. As morning sunlight illuminated the scene, Beverly approached the family once more. The night's events had transformed her, gone was the polished, subtly prejudiced flight attendant. In her place stood a woman humbled by her own failings and the courage she'd witnessed. The evacuation reports are complete, she said, addressing Darius formally. I've made sure to document the assistance your daughters provided. Without them, we would have had injuries during evacuation. Thank you, Darius replied simply. Beverly hesitated, then continued. I've also filed a personal addendum acknowledging my initial response to your offer of assistance. The airline needs to know how bias can compromise safety. Keisha studied her appraisingly. That took courage. Not compared to what your family did. Beverly's professional composure cracked slightly. I've been a flight attendant for 17 years. I've never questioned my judgment until yesterday. Questioning is how we grow, Keisha said, her psychologist's insight evident. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several official-looking vehicles. Captain Hammond, who had been debriefing with airline representatives, hurried over. Brass is here, he informed Darius. And media. Lots of media. Indeed, news vans had begun assembling at the perimeter, reporters jockeying for position as the story of Flight 2507's miraculous landing spread across networks. The first officials to approach them were airline executives, their faces a mixture of relief and corporate concern. Captain Hammond, the lead executive began, we understand you had assistance during the emergency landing. His eyes slid past Darius to scan the crowd. The pilot who helped you, is he available for a statement? Hammond's expression hardened. He's standing right in front of you. Major Darius Washington, formerly of the 336th Fighter Squadron. My commanding officer and the man responsible for saving your aircraft and everyone on board. The executive's momentary confusion spoke volumes. Oh. Of course. Major Washington. The airline is extremely grateful for your intervention. My entire family intervened, Darius corrected firmly. My wife coordinated passenger care. My daughters assisted with emergency procedures and evacuation. The executive nodded too quickly. Yes, certainly. We'd like to arrange a proper recognition. Perhaps a statement to the press about the airline's commitment to passenger safety. And diversity, Keisha interjected smoothly. Since it was a black pilot who saved your predominantly white passengers and crew. The executive's discomfort was palpable. Of course. Diversity is very important too. He was interrupted by the arrival of a military contingent, Air Force officers who approached with far more ceremony than the airline representatives had shown. The lead officer, a colonel, saluted Darius crisply. Major Washington. Colonel Rivera, Air Combat Command. Your reputation precedes you, sir. Darius returned the salute, military precision undiminished by civilian life. Colonel. The Air Force would like to formally acknowledge your actions. Rivera turned to include Hammond in his next statement. Both of you demonstrated the highest traditions of military aviation excellence. Just doing what we were trained to do, Colonel, Darius replied modestly. Nevertheless, the Secretary of the Air Force has authorized me to inform you that your service record will be updated to reflect this incident. The Colonel's expression softened slightly. That promotion to Lieutenant Colonel that was inexplicably delayed. Consider it retroactively granted, with appropriate back pay adjustments. Darius stood straighter, the significance of this gesture not lost on him or his family. That inexplicable delay had been anything but. He and Keisha had always known that his advancement had stalled due to factors unrelated to his performance. As the Colonel and Darius spoke further, the media had begun setting up for a formal press conference. Producers scurried about, directing camera placements and light levels. A representative from the governor's office arrived, prepared to make a statement about state emergency response. Beverly, watching the circus unfold, turned to the twins. They're going to try to control this narrative. Make Captain Hammond and the airline the heroes. We know, Zara replied without rancor. We've seen it before. Indeed, as the press conference began, it became clear that the airline representatives intended to center Captain Hammond in their story, with Darius as a fortuitous assistant. The twins exchanged knowing glances as Hammond was called to the microphone first, corporate hands guiding him to the perfect camera position. But Captain Gerald Hammond had not survived combat missions and an emergency landing to participate in such revisionism. Before I say anything else, he began firmly, stepping away from the airline representative's guiding hand, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. Flight 2507 is alive today because of Major Darius Washington. The assembled media focused their attention as Hammond continued, his voice carrying the unquestionable authority of a senior pilot. I was privileged to serve under Major Washington's command in the 336th Fighter Squadron. Yesterday, he again demonstrated why he was the finest officer I've ever known. Hammond's gaze swept the assembled crowd. Major Washington took control of a failing aircraft that 3 separate system engineers have now confirmed should not have been recoverable. The fact that we're standing here giving statements instead of attending funerals is entirely due to his exceptional skill. The airline representatives shifted uncomfortably as Hammond continued, departing entirely from their prepared statement. Furthermore, his daughters Zara and Imani Washington provided crucial assistance during the emergency. Their knowledge of aviation procedures surpasses that of many working pilots I know. Hammond paused, his expression hardening as he delivered his final point. And yet, when Major Washington first offered his assistance, he was rejected. Not because of any lack of qualification, but because certain individuals made assumptions based solely on the color of his skin. A murmur ran through the assembled press corps. Cameras swiveled toward Beverly, who stood straight-backed, accepting the scrutiny without evasion. I was one of those individuals, she acknowledged when a reporter thrust a microphone toward her. My prejudice nearly cost lives. That's the truth that needs to be reported alongside this miraculous landing. The press conference evolved into something the airline had clearly not anticipated, an unflinching examination of how bias had nearly turned an emergency into a catastrophe. When Darius finally took the microphone, his quiet dignity and refusal to sensationalize the incident only heightened its impact. This isn't just about one flight, he concluded. It's about who we assume belongs in the cockpit. Who we trust with our lives. Yesterday proved that excellence knows no color. As the formal statements concluded, reporters clamored for follow-up questions. One pushed forward, addressing the twins directly. Zara and Imani, we understand you were traveling to interview at Westfield Aviation Academy. Will you still be pursuing that opportunity after this experience? The twins glanced at their parents before Imani answered. More than ever. What happened on Flight 2507 is exactly why aviation needs diverse voices and experiences. And will this incident affect your chances of admission? Another reporter called out. Zara responded with quiet confidence. If an academy claims to value excellence and safety above all, then yesterday's events should speak for themselves. As the press conference wound down, Parker Thompson approached the family once more. His demeanor had transformed since their first encounter on the aircraft. Humility had replaced arrogance. Major Washington, Mrs. Washington, Zara, Imani, he acknowledged each of them with newfound respect. "I've been doing a lot of thinking overnight." "That's often the effect of nearly dying," Keisha observed dryly. Thompson nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "I deserve that. Listen, there's something I haven't mentioned to any of you." He handed Darius a business card. "Besides my company, I sit on the board of trustees at Westfield Aviation Academy." The twins exchanged surprised glances as Thompson continued. "I'd like to make amends in a meaningful way. Not just words." His gaze fixed on Zara and Imani. "The Academy's admissions committee meets tomorrow. I'd like to personally present your applications, and the events of Flight 2507, for their consideration." "We don't want special treatment," Zara stated firmly. "It's not special treatment to recognize extraordinary capability," Thompson countered. "It's correcting a system that has traditionally overlooked it." As the Washingtons considered his offer, a group of passengers from Flight 2507 approached. Led by the elderly woman who had been one of the first to stand up for Darius, they formed a semicircle around the family. "We've taken up a collection," the woman announced, holding out an envelope. "For your daughter's education. It's not much, but it's our way of saying thank you." Keisha started to politely decline, but the woman persisted. "Young ladies like these are exactly who we want flying our planes in the future," she insisted. "Please accept this as an investment in all our safety." As the family accepted the gesture with grace, Captain Hammond rejoined them, having extricated himself from airline representatives. "The NTSB wants your formal statement," he told Darius. "And I've been informed that the Air Force Times is doing a feature on the incident." He grinned slightly. "Seems you're about to become famous, Major." "That was never the goal," Darius replied simply. "Maybe it should have been," Hammond suggested. "Maybe if more people knew your story, and your daughter's ambitions, the next black pilot offering help wouldn't be questioned." As dawn gave way to full morning, emergency buses arrived to transport passengers to Denver. The Washingtons prepared to board. Their original mission, the Academy interviews, seemingly rendered moot by the events of the past 24 hours. Yet as they gathered their few belongings, Beverly approached one final time. No longer in uniform, she seemed smaller, more human. "I'll be testifying before the airline's safety board next week," she informed them. "About how bias can compromise safety protocols. I'd like to cite your family's experience, if you'll permit it." Darius considered her request. "Will it make a difference?" "I don't know," Beverly admitted. "But I have to try." As the buses departed Rockwood Airfield, leaving behind the damaged aircraft and the scene of near tragedy, the Washington family sat together in contemplative silence. Through the window, they could see media helicopters still circling the site, ensuring that the story of Flight 2507 would reach far beyond those directly involved. "It shouldn't take a near disaster for people to see past their prejudices," Zara observed quietly. "No," Darius agreed, "it shouldn't. But sometimes, that's what it takes." "So what happens now?" Imani asked, the question encompassing far more than their immediate plans. Keisha smiled at her daughters, fierce maternal pride evident in her expression. Now the real work begins." 1 week after the dramatic landing at Rockwood Airfield, the Washington family stood before the imposing granite facade of Westfield Aviation Academy. The prestigious institution, nestled in the Colorado foothills, had trained military and commercial pilots for over 70 years. Its stone buildings and manicured grounds projected tradition, excellence, and, though unspoken, exclusivity. "Ready?" Darius asked his daughters as they approached the administration building. The twins, dressed in crisp white shirts and navy blazers, nodded with the quiet confidence that had seen them through the flight crisis. Though their Rockwood experience had made national news, they had insisted on keeping their scheduled interview date rather than accepting special consideration. "We want to earn this," Imani had explained when Thompson offered to arrange immediate admission. "The same way Dad earned his wings." Inside, they were directed to a conference room where the admissions committee awaited. 5 somber-faced individuals sat behind a long oak table, 4 men and 1 woman, all white, all regarding the Washington family with carefully neutral expressions. Major and Mrs. Washington, Zara, Imani, the committee chair, Dean Harrington, acknowledged them with formal politeness. "We appreciate your punctuality despite your recent experiences." The understatement hung in the air as the family took their seats. "We've reviewed your applications," Harrington continued, shuffling papers unnecessarily. "Your academic qualifications are certainly adequate. However, the Academy has certain traditions and standards that go beyond grades and test scores." Keisha's hand found Darius's under the table, both recognizing the familiar preamble to rejection. "We seek candidates who demonstrate exceptional composure under pressure," another committee member added. "Leadership qualities that cannot be taught in a classroom." "With respect," Zara began, "we believe our involvement in the Flight 2507 incident." "Yes, about that incident," Harrington interrupted. "While certainly dramatic, we must be careful not to allow media sensationalism to influence our admissions process. The Academy cannot appear to lower its standards based on publicity." The phrase, "lower its standards," landed like a physical blow. Darius straightened, preparing to respond, when the conference room door opened. Beverly Miller entered, still in her airline uniform. Behind her came several passengers from Flight 2507, including the elderly woman who had organized the education fund. "Excuse me," Harrington began, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "This is a private admissions meeting. And I am a first-hand witness to these applicants' qualifications," Beverly replied calmly. "As are all of us." She gestured to the passengers. "We're here to provide testimony you won't find in any application." Before Harrington could object further, Captain Hammond entered, resplendent in his formal airline captain's uniform complete with gold braid and medals. "Dean Harrington," he nodded to the committee chair. "I believe my colleague Major Washington has already outlined his daughter's technical knowledge and quick thinking during our emergency." "Captain Hammond," Harrington acknowledged, visibly torn between irritation at the interruption and deference to Hammond's position. "While we appreciate your input, the Academy has specific criteria. Such as practical emergency management." Hammond interrupted. "Or real-time application of aerodynamic principles during hydraulic failure scenarios. Because I witnessed both from these young women at 30,000 feet." The door opened again, admitting Parker Thompson. Unlike the others, his presence clearly registered with the committee, several members straightening in their seats. "Mr. Thompson," Harrington's tone shifted to one of cautious respect. "We weren't expecting you today." "Clearly," Thompson replied dryly. "Otherwise this meeting might have taken a different direction from the start." He crossed to stand behind the twins. "As a trustee of this institution for 15 years, I've reviewed thousands of applications. Never have I encountered candidates whose actions so thoroughly embodied the Academy's stated values of excellence, courage, and service." The committee members exchanged uncertain glances as the dynamics in the room shifted. Harrington attempted to regain control. "Mr. Thompson, while your input is valued, the committee must maintain its independence." "Independence is admirable," Thompson cut in. "Bias is not." He placed a folder on the table. "I've taken the liberty of reviewing the Academy's admission statistics for the past 20 years. Do you know how many black women have been admitted during that time?" Uncomfortable silence answered his question. 3, Thompson continued. "Out of nearly 4,000 cadets. All 3 had qualifications that exceeded their white male counterparts by significant margins." He looked directly at Harrington. Care to explain the statistical improbability of that outcome, Dean? Beverly stepped forward before Harrington could respond. When Flight 2507 was in crisis, I made assumptions about who could help based solely on appearance. It nearly cost 200 lives. Her voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. Are you making the same mistake with these exceptional young women? The committee room had grown crowded with supporters, each adding personal testimonies about the twins' actions during the crisis. The elderly passenger described how Imani had helped secure her oxygen mask while simultaneously calming a panicking teenager. Another recounted Zara's precise instructions that prevented injuries during evacuation. As the testimonials continued, the admissions committee's formal facade began to crack, their expressions shifting from skepticism to thoughtfulness. Finally, Captain Hammond delivered the most pointed challenge. Westfield claims to train the best aviators in the world. If you turn away candidates of this caliber because they don't fit your mental image of who belongs in a cockpit, then your institution has failed its own mission. Throughout this unexpected defense, the twins had remained composed, neither shrinking from scrutiny nor displaying entitlement. When Harrington finally turned to them, they met his gaze directly. Perhaps, he conceded, we should focus our discussion on your actual emergency response rather than procedural considerations. What followed was not so much an interview as a debriefing. The twins answered technical questions about aircraft systems, emergency protocols, and aerodynamic principles with a precision that impressed even the most skeptical committee members. Their description of the crisis revealed not just knowledge but the intuitive understanding of flight that separates adequate pilots from exceptional ones. As the session concluded, Harrington cleared his throat. We'll need to deliberate. No, Thompson interrupted firmly. No more delays or deliberations used as cover for bias. I move for an immediate vote on these applications, as is my right as a trustee. The committee members exchanged glances, recognizing the inevitable. One by one, they nodded their assent. Congratulations, Zara and Imani Washington, Harrington announced with newfound sincerity. Welcome to Westfield Aviation Academy. The twins accepted the news with dignity, though their clasped hands betrayed their excitement. As handshakes were exchanged and paperwork processed, Thompson pulled Darius aside. There's one more thing, he said quietly. The academy needs a new flight instructor. Someone who can bring real-world emergency experience to our simulator training. Darius looked surprised. Are you offering me a position? With appropriate rank and salary, Thompson confirmed. This institution needs to change, Major. Not just admitting two exceptional young women, but transforming its culture from within. The offer represented everything Darius had been denied in his career: recognition, influence, the chance to shape the next generation of aviators. The significance wasn't lost on Keisha, who had joined them. You're asking us to move our entire lives to Colorado, she observed. I'm asking you to help change aviation, Thompson corrected. Starting with this academy. 6 months later, a small ceremony took place on Westfield's airfield. Against the backdrop of training aircraft, Zara and Imani Washington stood in their cadet uniforms, preparing for their first solo flights as academy students. Their fellow cadets, a more diverse group than in previous years, watched with respectful attention. Instructor Major Darius Washington performed the final pre-flight check on the Cessna training aircraft, his new role as the Academy's Emergency Response Training Director evident in the respect shown by other instructors. Pre-flight checks complete, he confirmed with professional detachment, though his eyes betrayed fatherly pride. Runway is clear for takeoff. The twins climbed into their respective aircraft with practiced ease. In the months since their admission, they had distinguished themselves not by seeking special treatment but by setting new performance standards for all cadets. Beverly, who had been invited to witness this milestone, stood with Keisha at the edge of the tarmac. I never thought my greatest failure would lead to so much change, she remarked, watching the twins prepare for takeoff. Sometimes we need to crash before we can truly fly, Keisha replied philosophically. Captain Hammond, who had taken a temporary teaching position at the academy during his airline's investigation of Flight 2507, joined them with Thompson. The NTSB report was released this morning, Hammond informed them. Official finding: catastrophic mechanical failure compounded by cultural factors that impeded appropriate emergency response. Cultural factors, Thompson repeated with a raised eyebrow. That's one way to phrase it. It's a start, Hammond acknowledged. The airline has implemented new bias recognition training for all crew members. Beverly's testimony was apparently quite compelling. On the runway, Imani's aircraft began its takeoff roll, followed moments later by Zara's. The assembled observers fell silent as both Cessnas accelerated smoothly, rotated with textbook precision, and lifted into the Colorado sky. As they gained altitude, executing a perfect formation climb, Darius stood a little straighter. "That's my girls," he said quietly. "No," Keisha corrected, linking her arm through his. "Those are our future pilots." The aircraft banked in unison, catching the afternoon sun on their wings as they turned toward the training area. Below, the academy that had nearly rejected them now watched with collective pride as Zara and Imani Washington claimed their rightful place in the sky, not as exceptions or tokens, but as aviators of exceptional promise. "They're just the beginning," Thompson observed, watching other cadets of color look skyward with newfound possibility in their expressions. Darius nodded in agreement. The beginning of aviation as it always should have been. Against the vast blue canvas of possibility, 2 black women piloted their own aircraft for the first time, their excellence undeniable, their future limitless, their presence transforming not just Westfield Academy but the very definition of who belongs in the cockpit. What do you think about the Washington twins' journey? Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated because of how they look? Comment below with your thoughts or similar experiences you've had. If this story of courage against prejudice moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful true stories that need to be told. Share this with someone who needs inspiration today, because representation matters in every field, including the skies above us. Thank you for watching, and remember, excellence knows no color, gender, or background. It only needs the chance to soar. The story of the Washington family reveals how deeply prejudice can impact even life-or-death situations. When bias blinds us to someone's abilities, we don't just hurt them, we potentially harm everyone. Darius Washington wasn't judged by his exceptional qualifications but by his skin color, nearly costing hundreds of lives. Yet the story also shows the power of excellence to eventually break through barriers. The twins' knowledge and composure forced others to confront their biases. Real transformation happens when those with privilege, like Parker Thompson and Beverly Miller, acknowledge their prejudice and take concrete steps to dismantle discriminatory systems. Change requires both the excellence of those facing discrimination and the willingness of those perpetuating it to recognize their failings. The Washington twins didn't just earn their place, they created a path for others to follow, proving that true merit transcends race when given the opportunity to demonstrate itself. What biases might be preventing you from recognizing excellence in unexpected places? Have you ever witnessed discrimination that endangered others or denied qualified people their opportunities? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of courage and excellence in the face of prejudice resonated with you, hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge our assumptions and inspire change. And please share this with anyone who needs a reminder that excellence knows no color, especially those in positions to open doors for others. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the skies with the Washington family. May their story remind us all to judge by capability, not color.